The sound of fabric tearing echoed louder than the applause. It happened so fast, one tug, a sharp gasp, and suddenly the side of my dress came undone in front of hundreds. I stood frozen at the center of the stage, still holding the bouquet from the opening ceremony, as whispers surged like waves crashing around me. My hands instinctively reached for the torn seam, but there was nothing I could do to hide it. The spotlight, once warm and flattering, now felt like a cruel magnifying glass. I heard someone laugh, high, sharp, and triumphant. Behind me, one of the other presenters was smirking, her hand still half raised like a magician who had just finished her trick. The audience didn't know whether to gasp or pretend it hadn't happened. Cameras clicked. Phones rose. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it over the growing chaos. I wanted to run, to disappear into the curtains and never be seen again. But my heels were glued to the stage, my shame as public as the glittering backdrop behind me. Then, through the chaos, I saw him, the CEO, rising from the VIP table with calm, deliberate steps. He took off his black jacket as he walked, not rushing, not hesitating. The crowd parted instinctively as he moved, the room bending to his presence. Without a word, he stepped onto the stage, wrapped the jacket around my shoulders with impossible gentleness, and leaned down beside me. His voice was low but clear. Walk with me. I didn't move at first. My breath was stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat, and my knees felt like paper. But then I felt it, his hand, warm and steady on the small of my back, not pushing, just waiting. My fingers clutched the edges of his jacket around me as I looked up, and his eyes weren't filled with pity like I feared. They were filled with fire. Not the kind that burns you, but the kind that stands between you and the cold. The crowd had fallen into a hush, the kind of silence that follows a thunderclap. I was no one in that world. A background name on the event schedule, an assistant asked to fill in last minute. I wasn't meant to shine, and I certainly wasn't meant to stand next to him. But there I was, my dress torn, my dignity barely holding on. Yet somehow, with his presence beside me, I wasn't small. Slowly, I placed one foot forward. The floor didn't crumble. The sky didn't fall. And as I took another step, he walked beside me like I belonged there. Whispers rose again, but now they weren't cruel. They were confused, curious, odd. The same people who had looked away moments ago were now watching as if they'd missed something big, because they had. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The humiliation hadn't disappeared, but it had been rewritten, reframed. And when he leaned closer and whispered, "That's twice I've watched you be stronger than them," I realized this wasn't just kindness. It was recognition. The walk across the stage felt endless, but this time not because of shame. Every step beside him rewrote the narrative I thought had already been decided for me. The audience parted like a tide, stunned into silence, their expressions a collage of disbelief, admiration, and something else, envy. I kept my head high, the torn silk brushing against my legs, his tailored jacket draped over my shoulders like a shield. No one dared to laugh now. As we reached the steps that led off stage, I expected him to let go, to disappear back into the crowd like a hero who had done his part. But he didn't. He turned toward me, lowering his voice just enough for only me to hear. "You're not leaving through the back," he said gently. "You're leaving through the front. With me." I blinked, unsure whether it was a gesture or a statement. But then he offered his arm again, and without thinking, I took it. The crowd followed us with their eyes as we passed the front row. The woman who had ripped my dress earlier stood frozen, her smile now stiff, her confidence unraveling with each step we took together. A moment ago, I had been nothing more than a footnote in her performance. Now, I was part of a story no one had seen coming. When we reached the grand hall doors, I felt the weight of every camera, every pair of eyes. And yet, I didn't feel exposed anymore. I felt chosen. Not because I was perfect, but because, despite everything, I had stayed on my feet. And somehow he had seen that. Outside the venue, the air was cooler, quieter, like the world itself had taken a breath. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding mine until we stepped beyond the golden doors and into the empty corridor lined with marble and silence. My hands still clutched the edges of his jacket, the scent of him faint but steady. I stopped walking. My legs, strong on stage, now trembled beneath the weight of what just happened. He turned to face me, his brow furrowed, not with confusion, but with concern so genuine it nearly undid me. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked softly. I looked down at the ruined hem of my dress, the torn silk like a scar. What was I supposed to say? I whispered that I was humiliated, that she did it on purpose and no one cared. My voice cracked, the rush of shame finally catching up. They would have said I was being dramatic. Again. He stepped closer but didn't touch me. "Not yet. You weren't dramatic," he said. "You were dignified. And you still are." His words didn't come like comfort. They came like truth. And that was worse, because no one had ever said that to me before. I laughed bitterly, more out of disbelief than amusement. "You say that now, but tomorrow they'll twist it. I'll be the desperate girl who ruined a fashion event just to get your attention." He didn't flinch. "Then let them twist it," he said, "because I saw the real story, and so did everyone who matters." I looked up, and in his eyes I saw that he meant it. Every single word. He finally stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until there was barely space between us. "You think I didn't notice you before tonight?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You think I needed a ripped dress to see you?" I blinked, stunned. The hallway lights cast soft gold across his features, but his eyes, they were sharp, unwavering. I couldn't look away. "You were the only one not trying to be noticed," he continued. "That's why you stood out. Everyone else was performing. You were just real." My chest tightened. I wanted to believe him, but after everything I had just endured, it felt impossible. "Real doesn't survive in a room like that," I said quietly, the bitterness slipping through. "Real gets laughed at, ripped open, silenced." For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right, but not tonight." He took my hand, not dramatically, not for show, just his fingers, warm and steady, wrapping around mine like an anchor. "Tonight, Real walked off stage with its head high," he said. "And the rest? They'll spend the week trying to explain how they lost the spotlight." A laugh escaped me, small, surprised, like I'd forgotten how. He smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "You don't have to prove anything to them," he said. "You already did." I looked at our hands, still joined, and something inside me cracked, not painfully, but like a shell giving way. For the first time, I felt something shift. Not just in him, but in me. Like maybe I didn't have to disappear anymore. He guided me down the corridor, away from the murmurs we could still faintly hear echoing beyond the ballroom doors. As the heels of my shoes clicked against the marble, I glanced down at the dress, the torn side tucked beneath his jacket, clumsily hidden, but no longer the center of my shame. I realized then that it wasn't the rip that hurt the most, it was how easily people laughed. How quickly they turned away. "They'll move on," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "They always do." "Let them," he replied, "but I won't." I stopped. The air around us felt too still, too charged. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why me?" I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't loud or fearless like the others. I didn't belong in his world of spotlights and power. "Because you didn't ask for attention," he said simply. "And when they gave you none, you still stood there, dignified, humiliated, but standing. You don't even know how rare that is." My eyes stung, but I didn't blink. I couldn't. "You saw all of that." He nodded. "From the moment you stepped on stage." A silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, but intense, like the moment before a confession. "So what now?" I asked, afraid of the answer. "Now," he said, lifting my hand gently, "we keep walking. Together." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not rescue, not fantasy, but something deeper. Like someone had finally found the pieces of me I'd spent years hiding, and chose them anyway. The next morning, my name was everywhere. Not for a scandal, not for a headline I'd have to hide from, but for something else. The girl in the ripped dress. The CEO's quiet exit. Who was she really? Photos flooded the internet, most blurry, some painfully clear. In every frame, I wasn't broken. I was walking, chin up, jacket wrapped around my torn dress, his hand in mine. It didn't feel like me, and yet it was. I stood at the cafe window, watching as strangers scrolled through their phones, reacting to my face like it belonged to someone they knew. I didn't know whether to feel exposed or liberated. My phone buzzed again. Another message I hadn't opened. Some were apologies. Some were opportunistic. A few came from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. But the one message that made my heart stop was from him. Don't hide today. Come with me. 5 words. That was all. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the reply. I should have been terrified. Last night had been overwhelming. Too fast, too unreal. But when I closed my eyes, all I could remember was the weight of his jacket around my shoulders and the way he looked at me like I wasn't an accident, like I was meant to be seen. I exhaled, slowly grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. Because maybe, for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop being background noise in other people's stories and start living mine. The car waiting outside wasn't flashy. No blacked-out windows, no sleek sports curves, just a simple sedan, parked quietly by the curb. But he was inside. I could feel it before I even touched the door handle. As I opened it, he looked up from his phone. And the second our eyes met, that same steady presence washed over me again. No theatrics, no pressure, just him. You came, he said softly, as if he hadn't been sure. I slid into the seat and offered a small smile. I almost didn't, I admitted. But then I thought about how silence never really protected me before. His smile grew, not the kind meant for the press, but something softer, warmer. I was hoping you'd say that, he murmured. The drive was quiet at first, but it wasn't awkward, just calm. As the city blurred past the windows, I let myself relax, finally. So, I asked after a moment, where are we going? Another stage to rescue me from. He chuckled, eyes still on the road. No more stages, just a rooftop cafe where no one cares what you're wearing or who you're sitting with. My breath caught. No boardroom power plays, no cameras, just space where I could exist without defending every breath I took. And if someone does recognize me? I asked. Let them, he replied. Let them see who you really are, not what happened to your dress. I looked out the window, heart pounding in a quieter, steadier rhythm. Maybe this wasn't a detour. Maybe it was the start of something I'd never let myself want. Until now. The rooftop cafe was nothing like I expected. No velvet ropes, no hosts checking last names. Just wooden tables kissed by sunlight, potted plants swaying in the breeze, and the gentle hum of a guitar playing from somewhere inside. It smelled like fresh bread and citrus tea. For the first time in days, no one was staring. No one whispered behind menus. The CEO, no, he led me to a small table near the edge, with the city stretched beneath us like a painting. I sat slowly, careful not to ruin the moment, still half waiting for reality to snap back and remind me who I really was. But when he took off his jacket and placed it gently across my lap, like he had on stage, something shifted again. You can stop holding your breath now, he said quietly, pouring 2 glasses of water. I hadn't even realized I was. I don't know how to be like them, I confessed. Perfect, poised, untouchable. He leaned in, elbows on the table, eyes locked on mine. Good, he said, because I don't want that. I want you. The girl who stood there, heart pounding, dress torn, and didn't run. His words weren't polished or rehearsed. They didn't sound like a line, and somehow that made them hit harder. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. You barely know me. He smiled. Then let me start. And as the breeze tugged at the edges of his shirt and the light caught in his eyes just so, I realized this wasn't a rescue. It was an invitation. Later that afternoon, my inbox was on fire. News outlets had picked up the story again. Only now, it wasn't just gossip. They were asking questions. About me. About him. About us. I stared at the headlines from the rooftop cafe, my untouched tea growing cold beside me. Who is she? From obscurity to the CEO's side. A love story or a scandal? I should have panicked. I should have felt the weight of it all come crashing down. But then he returned to the table, carrying 2 slices of strawberry cake and laughing at something the waiter had said. When he saw my face, he set the plates down gently. "They're going to talk," I murmured, turning my screen toward him. "They already are." He glanced at the phone, then back at me. "Let them." His calm wasn't performative. It wasn't the confidence of someone trying to prove he wasn't afraid. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had already chosen his side. "This isn't how I imagined anything," I whispered. "Me neither," he replied, with a smile that made something flutter in my chest. "But I don't want anything else." I looked around. No one at the cafe was watching us. No cameras. No pressure. Just sunlight, cake, and the man who somehow saw me beneath the torn fabric and fading headlines. "It's not going to be easy," I warned. "Nothing worth it ever is," he said, cutting into his slice with a fork. And for the first time, I believed it. A week passed. Then, too, the internet moved on, just like he said it would. The noise faded, replaced by newer scandals, shinier dresses, and faces more familiar than mine. But something strange happened in the quiet. I started breathing again. I went back to my routines, but they weren't the same. People looked at me differently, not with pity, but with curiosity, like they weren't sure whether to underestimate me anymore. At work, no one mentioned the ripped dress, but I caught the subtle nods, the softened stares. As if I'd survived something none of them had the courage to face. He never pushed, never posted, never used what happened for headlines. But every evening he called. Every Sunday we walked. Sometimes in the park. Sometimes just around the block. Never grand gestures. Just presence. Consistency. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. Not because I trusted him blindly, but because he listened like someone who wanted to understand. One evening, while walking by the river, I asked him why he didn't step in sooner. "You were handling it," he said simply, "and I didn't want to steal that from you." I stopped in my tracks. "You mean you let me suffer?" He turned serious. "No, I let you stand, because when I stepped in, I wanted the world to know it was by your choice, not because you needed saving." That answer stayed with me, echoed in my mind long after. He walked me home. Because maybe that was the real difference. He didn't rescue me. He respected me. That night, I stood in front of my mirror for a long time, longer than I had in years. Not adjusting a dress or fixing my hair, just looking. The reflection, staring back, wasn't glamorous. No designer gown, no camera flashes, just me, in a soft shirt and tied back hair, with quiet eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. I touched the edge of the scar near my collarbone, a faint mark left from that night. The dress was ruined, but I'd kept it anyway, folded in a drawer like proof that something beautiful had come from something cruel. I took it out and held up. The tear across the side was still there, threads frayed and uneven, but I didn't feel shame. I felt power. That dress had been the start of something. Not a downfall, but a turning point. My phone buzzed again. This time, no headlines. Just his name. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., I have something to ask you." My heart skipped. Not from panic, but anticipation. And strangely calm. I placed the dress back in the drawer and closed it softly. Because I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't the girl on stage being laughed at. I wasn't the assistant in the background. I was the woman who walked through the wreckage, with someone by her side who didn't try to erase the past, but honored it. I looked back at my reflection one last time and whispered, Walk with me. Because now, those words were no longer his. They were mine too. The rooftop was empty when I arrived. Sunset had painted the sky in gold and coral, casting long shadows across the floor tiles. A single table stood near the edge, set with 2 glasses and a small velvet box at the center. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me still waited for the catch, for the moment this would all be revealed as a misunderstanding. But then I heard his footsteps behind me, steady and familiar. I turned, and there he was, no suit, no entourage, just him in rolled sleeves and nervous eyes. "You came," he said, like it mattered more than anything else. "You asked," I replied, stepping closer. He pulled out the chair for me, the way he always did. Old habits, now comforting ones. We sat in silence for a moment, the breeze lifting strands of my hair. "I didn't plan for this," he said finally. "Not the scandal, not the cameras, not falling for you in the middle of all of it." My breath caught, but he kept going. "But what I did plan, what I want, is something real. And I think we already started that." He opened the box slowly, not revealing a ring, but a small silver key. Confused, I looked at him. "It's not a proposal," he said quickly, "not yet. Just an invitation. To my home. To our space. If you want it." I stared at the key, heart thundering. No pressure. No spectacle. Just choice. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely free to say yes. I picked up the key slowly, its weight surprisingly warm in my palm. It wasn't sparkling or delicate, it was ordinary, real, just like the life he was offering me. Not a fairy tale, not a trophy behind glass, but something alive day by day. "You're not afraid this will all come back?" I asked, turning the key between my fingers. "The rumors, the whispers," he shook his head gently. "They might. They probably will. But I've already chosen where I stand when they do." There was something grounding in that answer. Not grand promises, just presence. I took a deep breath. "I don't need saving anymore," I whispered. "And I don't want to lose myself trying to be what people expect." He smiled, proud, not possessive. "That's exactly why I'm here." I closed my fingers around the key. "Then, let's build something that doesn't need spotlights to exist." He reached across the table, his hand finding mine. No cameras this time. No audience. Just the 2 of us, choosing each other, not in the ruins of some drama, but in the stillness that followed. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "we walk through it, together." And I knew he meant it, not as a line, not as an obligation, but as a promise formed from everything we'd endured. The dress had ripped, the crowd had mocked, but from it, I found something unshakable. Not a love that saved me, but one that saw me, even when I was invisible. And now, I wasn't walking behind anymore. I was walking beside. That night, I didn't dream of stages or spotlights. I dreamed of quiet mornings with coffee mugs that didn't match, laughter echoing from rooms still half-furnished, and music playing softly from a speaker we forgot to charge. I dreamed of arguing over takeout, of holding hands in grocery store aisles, of him stealing kisses when no one was watching. Not because we had to perform, but because we wanted to. The kind of life that didn't need applause, just presence. When I woke the next morning, the key still rested on my nightstand. I stared at it for a long moment, then reached for my phone. No headlines, no missed calls, just one message from him. "Good morning. Still walking with me?" My fingers hovered, but I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because I was already getting dressed. The ripped dress was still folded away, its tear untouched. I would never fix it. It wasn't something to erase. It was where the story turned. And now, each step I took reminded me that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes walks off a stage in silence, chin high, jacket heavy with meaning. And love? Love doesn't always arrive like fireworks. Sometimes it wraps itself around your shoulders when the world is laughing. Sometimes it hands you a key, not to a mansion, but to a life that's finally yours. So when I stepped outside and saw him waiting by the car, smiling like I just saved him, I didn't hesitate. I walked toward him, toward us. Would you have walked too, even with your dress ripped?